AP Physics. This is Summer Lesson 4, and it deals with problem-solving format. So, I also refer to it as breakdown format, but problem-solving format is a 5-step process that we will use to solve problems. The first thing you do is identify what is the problem asking for. You have to know what you're trying to get to before you start trying to solve a problem. Then step 2 is, what does the problem give you? Generally that means numbers. What numbers are you given? But it doesn't always have to be numbers. Step 3 is, using steps 1 and 2, you choose the formula, and if necessary you do any algebra to rearrange the formula to solve for the variable you're trying to find. Step 4 then is simple. You just substitute in the numbers from step 2 and you compute, and step 5 is to present the final answer. So that would include what variable is being solved for, what the number value is, and the units of measure. So here's a simple example. Compute the velocity of a car that travels 10 meters in 10 seconds. So the first thing it's looking for is velocity. Now you might ask, we've learned that there's several types of velocity. So ask yourself, is it the velocity at the beginning of the problem, at the end of the problem, or all the way through the problem? That's kind of one way to approach it. So this is the velocity all the way through the problem. So this is going to be an average velocity. That's step 1. You've identified it, and you just put V equals what question mark indicates it's something that you're trying to find. Then step 2 is, what numbers does the problem give you? What information? But usually it's numbers. So it tells us, first of all, you have to recognize that 20m, the m stands for meters. And so meters is a measure of distance. And you're going to have a sheet that has these formulas and these variables on it to help you identify it first, but eventually it'll become very natural. S, what does S stand for? It's seconds. So what is seconds a measure of? It's a measure of time. So you write D equals 20m, 20 meters, distance equals 20 meters, T equals 10s, time equals 10 seconds. Okay, so now the next thing you have to do, step 3, is choose a formula. So what you do is you look for a formula on your formula sheet that has V, D, and T in it. They don't necessarily have to be in that order. But if you can find a formula that has solved for V, that's great, but it doesn't have to. So we're looking for a formula that has V, D, and T that we've covered already in this set of lessons. And that formula would be V equals D over T. Velocity equals distance over time. So that's step 3, is identifying the formula. And if we needed to do algebra, then we would have done the algebra off to the right side in this case. Now we're going to plug in the numbers. So V equals 20 meters, D over time, 10 seconds. And so the next step then is just to use your calculator to calculate that answer. And that would give you V equals 2 meters per second. So you have to have all 3 of those components in the final answer. The variable, which is V, the magnitude, which is 2, and the units of measure, which is meters per second. Okay, here's another one. So Trezor starts running with an initial velocity of 0 meters per second and finishes with a final velocity of 10 meters per second. What was his average velocity? So again, step 1, it's asking us for average velocity. So we write V equals question mark. What numbers does it give us? Okay, here you see that meters per second is a measure of velocity. And you see 2 different velocities here. So again, you ask the question, if it doesn't explicitly state it, is this an initial velocity, a final velocity, or a velocity all the way through the problem? Well, it does tell you this, that the initial velocity is 0 meters per second. So we can write that down, V0 equals 0 meters per second, and the final velocity is 10 meters per second, so VF equals 10 meters per second. Okay, now we have 2 formulas for average velocity that we've learned already. And so there's one of them, and there's the second one right there. So how do you know which one to choose? Well, we have 2 formulas for V. Which one do we use? We use the one that contains the variables we were given in the problem. We know V0 and VF. We do not know D or T, so we use the first equation in this case. So we're going to go ahead and do that and use this equation. And now we're just simply going to do step 4. We're going to plug the numbers in and then compute. And you end up with V equals 5 meters per second. And that takes care of our little lesson on problem-solving format. So you will always lay your problems out in this fashion.